Dear friends, today our guest is a Russian public figure, blogger, journalist, urbanist, a person you know, Ilya Varlamov. Good afternoon, Ilya. Thank you for agreeing to participate in one of our new editions of the series of interviews with famous figures. Bloggers, urbanists. Now is the time. Well, first of all, then a question on the specie. About Minsk from an urban specialist. There are problems with Minsk as, in principle, with any Soviet city. If we take all our heritage, then here all Soviet cities are similar. This inhuman scale, these wide avenues. These are huge distances. That is, Minsk looks great on Soviet postcards. When you look at these views here, then wow, great. Awesome, cool city. But when you find yourself there as a person, you understand that it is uncomfortable for you to be there on these streets. That these wide avenues. And here I said earlier that this is OD only for rallies. And now it really happened that these wide avenues, they are OD for rallies. Such revolutionary urbanism. Apparently, in Soviet times, when these avenues were laid, they thought that there must be a place where a large number of people could gather. Because in European cities, as we know, there is not always enough space. And here there is a huge scope for this. And now I see how the authorities are experiencing inconvenience from this entire urbanism of their own, because it is impossible to block everything. There is no way to competently block these huge open spaces. It helps people get together, which is not OD. By the way, you can recall an interesting story with Moscow. When our Manezhna Square was buoy rebuy. They say this directly Yesin after he saw how many people could gather in Manezh Square in 1991, when 500,000 gathered there. And he said to build up the arena square so that so many people would never gather under the walls of the Kremlin. Therefore, I think we'll see if there will be a OD reason after the victory of the opposition to reconstruct Minsk so that the streets are more humane. This is the first story that Minsk is simply not large-scale. And this needs to be fixed. You need to fix, you need to redo. And as far as new projects are concerned, in fact, there are not so many of them to have something to discuss. From what I remember, there is some kind of madness in the center. Some kind of disgusting thing is being buoyed there. I forget what it's called. Some kind of Lukashenka's friends, as I understand it. Oktyabrskaya Square, as I understand it. The second question was about the specificity of the Belarusian protests and how these wide streets influence the protests and their nature. But in principle, you have already answered. And how the role of the pandemic might have played what role in the protest movement? Perhaps, after all, people rallied when Lukashenka did not recognize the presence of coronavirus, when he said that it was necessary to be treated with a tractor, a bathhouse, a field, and so on. Perhaps, thanks to this, people began to understand that no one except themselves would make the country and their lives better. Firstly, during any events, people even far from politics, even far from following the agenda, they begin to follow the news. This is the first such problem that in an ordinary peaceful life, when everything is on as usual, people cannot be dragged into discussing the news. They are discussing some new films, who was born, and so on. And following a political or economic agenda is not interesting, it is boring, it is difficult. Therefore, people do not follow this. When the coronavirus started around the world, people opened their laptops, smartphones, and went to news sites to read what was on there. All media have a dramatic increase in traffic. I think you, as a person close to the media, saw this in your resources. And an opportunity arose for these people to find something. Because they were looking for answers to different questions, and an opportunity arose to communicate with these people somehow. A concrete example is from Belarus, when Lukashenka began to deny the coronavirus, saying that he needed to be treated with vodka, potatoes and something else. It seems to me that many people who used to trust him, trusted the authorities. Such a pro-vermin electorate that is accustomed to stability. There are many people who are ready to exchange not a very OD life for the fact that everything is calm, they are protected. They have some kind of stability, confidence in the future. In Russia, too, in terms of mentality, people are similar and there are also such people. And it seems to me that at that moment they saw that they were abandoned, that the authorities, which should somehow protect them, cannot protect them. And they see that the person on whom they somehow hoped and pinned was treated like a native father who would save in a difficult moment, and he turned out to be not very smart, a strange character who says that everything is fine. And your neighbors there are sick, dying and nothing can be done. It seems to me that this played a not very OD story with him. And many people turned away from him. At least, if you imagine for a second that I went crazy and I would be a fan of Lukashenka, I would rethink my attitude towards him after that. As in Russia, the media community and people in general, well, it is clear that most of the educated, intelligent, who follow what is happening, how they were influenced by the Belarusian protests? Has this become some kind of Excel? Because I have heard many opinions that, even if the Belarusians have already left, then it is time to start ing out and defend their rights. Or were there protests and were there? First, you need to understand that your news has entered our information agenda and become such an important part of it, that is, not discussing what is happening in Belarus and ignoring it, it is simply impossible even at the everyday level. And again, I have no statistics, but a significant part of your Telegram channel is the Russian audience. Not only Belarusians, but also many Russians, because everyone is watching this. At the everyday level, I have not seen that someone massively draws analogies that we are next. Is it possible with us or not? With us? We rather look at this history as a kind of future. What will happen to Putin in 2024? If we draw analogies, then how tired of Lukashenka? How he already those who, it would seem, will always be for him or those who do not care. You have no indifferent people left, you have no people who stand aside and say that everything is getting tired. Now it is difficult to stay on the sidelines simply because I am tired. And this fatigue is present even among the electorate, which is its electorate, which is not an opposition electorate. It is present. And Belarusian events allow us to somehow look into our future, which will be in 2024. Here, of course, it is important how these protests will affect Putin, whether he will see himself in today's Lukashenka, and whether he will make some correct conclusions for himself. That after all there is no need to hold on to power. And, of course, everyone is following us, the entire adequate audience supports the Belarusians. For Lukashenka I do not openly remember that. In a decent society, you cannot support Lukashenka. That is, apparently, somewhere there are some Sabbaths on the first channel, where they do strange things, but in general, among all my acquaintances, among all journalists, everyone supports the Belarusians, supports the protest. Perception of Belarus was often connected precisely with the personality of Lukashenka, and maybe something has changed now? Maybe now, if we talk about Belarus, in the understanding of the masses, then for such an ordinary person it will be not only Lukashenka, potatoes, a tractor, but also people who are fighting for their rights. That is, maybe now the image of Lukashenka will be so separated from Belarus, people will begin to understand that Belarus is not Lukashenka? Indeed, you are right when you say that there are certain stereotypes. If we take a very straightforward stereotype, then these are some kind, lovely people, they ride a tractor. Potatoes, Lukashenka, collective farms, order, a frozen Soviet Union. But this is usually the case for those who have not been to Belarus, but are watching on TV. This is the image that is implanted, including by Belarusian propaganda, Russian propaganda, because they show such an ideal collective farm country. The country is an ideal collective farm. When you come to Minsk, you see that the situation is a little different. There are absolutely normal progressive youth, your IT miracle and many companies known all over the world that make cool products, which is not in any way associated with Lukashenka. And cannot be associated with him. We see some cool projects there. Including on architecture, how the city can develop. And in fact, I do not think that Russian youth have such popular ideas about Belarus. Rather, they remained with such an older generation. But now, of course, everything has changed. Now, of course, we see completely different Belarusians, instead of those weak-willed. They say that Belarusians are generally the last of those who come out, among the post-Soviet republics, to a rally and will somehow defend their rights. And now we see a completely different story. Now we see people who did not just leave, but who leave for 3 months. 3 months is, I don't know. The French Yellow Vests gave up and everything somehow weakened in Hong Kong. When there were these protests, they also somehow began to decline. And in Belarus we see that for 3 months people out, and not only in Minsk, but also in other cities. The formats of actions are changing, more people are joining. And, of course, this is a completely unusual picture for the Russian viewer, for the Russian man in the street. And what could be so? And what? So you can defend your rights. And of course, Russians will learn from Belarusians in terms of defending their rights. Indeed, the Belarusians have been leaving for 3 months already. Which has not happened during this time. They have already dismantled the parts of the water cannons, and fought off the bandits in balaclavas. But nevertheless, Lukashenka is still in power. And what to do next, how to win? Of course, everyone has their own opinion on this, and it would be interesting to know yours. Look, there are a lot of people, especially outsiders. They say, well, what are you doing? We need tires, we need Molotov cocktails, we need stones, we need to take them like the Kyrgyz. They broke the gates, took everything out and solved the problem in one day. I am a media person, I am a journalist, I cannot speak. It is always convenient to say when you are sitting somewhere far away. And like a remote control on TV, I want more tin, give me some tin. In my opinion, this is wrong and I never urge anyone to take any risks. This is still a personal choice of everyone. It is a little wrong on my part to say that. It seems to me that from the point of view of tactics, what the Belarusians are doing, they are doing the right thing. Because the most important thing is if we now return to August, if we now return to the first protests, that unprecedented cruelty, that terror that Lukashenka unleashed against the Belarusians, all these beatings, rubber bulls, murders of civilians, they were clearly planned. They clearly discussed them, he clearly gathered before the elections with all his cops and gave them instructions. And I am sure that when they discussed the whole matter, they said, so, look, people will come out now. They will come out with sticks, with tires, with Molotov cocktails, and you will answer them and we will press everybody. But completely peaceful people came out who did not break a single glass, do not burn a single car. You are completely correct and peaceful people who came out to defend their civil rights. And so they faced this aggression, after which everything was choked with them. When they saw that such cruelty was going on against peaceful people who did nothing. When there was such a simple, outright terror against the people, it broke Lukashenka's entire plan of tough pressure. And now they sit and really don't know what to do, because people keep being out. And it seems to me this tactic of such a fundamentally peaceful protest, but persistently peaceful does not mean that now everyone will home. Peaceful but persistent. In this case, he is much more effective, because to Measure strength with Lukashenka, with his brutal cops, with everything else. I am not sure that this story will lead to something OD incorrect. And to measure in persistence, adequacy and mass character is precisely what the Belarusian opposition is really. Stronger than Lukashenka in. And Lukashenka simply has nothing to oppose. He clucks something in his clowns. We will start shooting now, we will start now. And it is clear that they will not start shooting, because you can shoot at a person when there is some reason. And it is clear that they are rattling their weapons, but they cannot do anything. And what is happening, it seems to me very correct. And this tactic should sooner or later end in victory. Let's hope. And what to do after the victory, which way to? Will the attitude of Russians and Russia towards Belarus change, if suddenly the Belarusians choose a political course? Change to Europe or something else? How will they react in Russia? Because propaganda reacts very sharply to this. Yes, here we must remember the lessons of the Maiden, the very lessons of the Maiden. Of course, people always react to this in different ways. You need to understand that Belarus is not an independent country, in the sense that it is small and it depends on Russia, Europe and the Baltic states. She depends on her environment. And it is impossible not to take into account the factor of the same Russia. And in my opinion, one of the mistakes of the Maiden is that the leaders of the Maiden said, "We have Ukraine, we are independent. We do what we want, and we generally do not care about Russia and everything else." Well, then Putin came and started a war with them. Here is a tactical question. Maybe it was necessary after all? It's not about groveling. I am not saying that you need to crawl to Putin to bow. Of course not. You just need to take into account that there are interests and you need to somehow plan further actions. In my opinion, what the Belarusian opposition is doing today, in terms of contact with Russia, it is doing absolutely correctly. They say that they will contact, what kind of partnership they are. And there is nothing like that. And I hope that Russian propaganda will not make us enemies. How, again, recalling the experience of Ukraine, this, unfortunately, is possible. When in a few months, both with the help of propaganda and with the help of political actions, they simply quarreled. Two peoples. People began to hate each other to the point that some began to crazy and with weapons to fight in Ukraine in the Donbass. Therefore, of course, the factor of Russia must be taken into account. And I hope that the Belarusian opposition will act wiser and, looking for a common language with Europe, will not forget about Russia and still some kind of dialogue will take place. Well, here again you ask me about Russia. In this story I am most surprised by the position of Russia. The position of Russia as a state that for some reason relies on Lukashenka. How? You have to do the bookmakers. They usually feel OD. How can you rely on Lukashenka now? How can you initiate something with him now, seeing everything that he leads? And if I were the Kremlin, I would simply be the first to the Belarusian opposition for a long time, the first to start a dialogue with them, the first to start giving political asylum to the Belarusians who are being repressed in Belarus. Why are people now leaving for Lithuania? Why are they leaving for Poland? It was necessary to be the first to say, "Guys, come to Moscow. We will provide you with everything, everything will be fine with you." And in this regard, of course, in no case should they quarrel with the Belarusian people. But for some reason, the Kremlin relies on Lukashenka, which frightens me. I hope that after Lukashenka leaves, after Lukashenka's to trial, our propaganda will not make enemies of Belarusians. And yet we will have some kind of peaceful partnership. Well then, the last question about this ardent propaganda, which has lately been extremely hostile. About the Polish puppeteers, about America, which sponsors All the protests, about the evil Belarusians extremists who set fire to the police station and the police. How to react to this? Ignore, counter propaganda, or just understand? And forgive? How to respond to propaganda on Belarusian television? You turn it on, and they tell you the same thing. Well, how do you react? People usually laugh. Because people see what's going on. People usually laugh and don't pay attention and don't take it seriously. It is clear that it is easier to do this in Belarus because everyone can see what is happening. When a person looks out the window, he sees who is leaving, why they are leaving. It seems to me difficult now to find a Belarusian, who would either never out himself, or have no friends or relatives, who would not out, and here it seems to me that nothing needs to be explained. And I do not think that your propaganda somehow influences the Belarusians. And the problem is, indeed, Russian propaganda affects Russia, because people are not so closely following what is happening in your country. Therefore, you just need to convey your position, show what is actually happening, talk about it. By the way, what are you doing well? Again, this Belarusian media miracle is just such an example of how some alternative sources of information are being created. And so you can't do anything with it. Here you need to understand that. As this shitty gun turned on, it also turns off and everything will be fine. Again. Let's hope. Thank you very much for this interview. Let's hope that everything will be fine and after a while we will all meet together in Minsk and sit and talk. Again. Yes, sure. Thank you, Ilya. Thank you. Good luck. Bye. Bye. That's all for today.
Спасибо, Илья.
Спасибо тебе.
Удачи.
Пока.
Пока. На этом сегодня все. Если вы хотите продолжение такого формата, пишите Навальному в личные сообщения, чтобы согласился на интервью. А я с вами на данный момент прощаюсь. Не забывайте оставлять комментарии, ставить пальцы вверх, делиться видео с друзьями. Тогда оно выйдет в тренды и больше людей узнает об этом. До новых встреч и хороших вам новостей.